in the middle of a hardware run on a Saturday morning when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. It was a 423 area code Chattanooga, local, but not anyone in my contacts. I almost sent it to voicemail. I had a list in my hand and a cart with 2 bags of deck screws and a box of weather stripping, and I was trying to remember whether my father-in-law had asked for the 3-inch or the 2.5. I picked up anyway. I don't know why. Some calls you just pick up. The man on the other end said his name was Bruce Halliday. He said he was the estate attorney my wife had hired 8 months before she passed. He said he was sorry to call on a weekend, and then he said something that made me set down the bag of screws and walk outside to the parking lot. He said, "Mr. Lester, I need you to come to my office Monday morning. There are some documents your wife left with me that I was instructed not to deliver until a specific condition was met. That condition has now been met. I think you should hear this in person." I stood in the parking lot of Ace Hardware in the February cold and I asked him what condition. He paused just long enough that I noticed it. "She asked me to wait until you had filed your taxes jointly for the last time," he said. "Until the estate was fully settled and the final return was done. She wanted you to have some time first." My wife's name was June. She had been 53 years old. She died of pancreatic cancer 14 months before that phone call, and she had done it the way she did everything, with a kind of organized, unhurried deliberateness that I had admired for 26 years and that, in those final months, had sometimes made me want to scream because I couldn't understand how she could be so calm about something so enormous. We had lived in the same house in Chattanooga, Tennessee for 19 years. A white craftsman bungalow on a half-acre lot with a front porch she had repainted twice and a backyard garden she had tended with a patience I never had. After she died, I left the garden mostly alone. I didn't know what I was doing out there, and whatever I did felt wrong. I told Bruce I would be there Monday at 9. I spent the rest of that weekend trying to think of a reasonable explanation for why my wife would have retained an estate attorney separately from our shared lawyer, separately from me, and left documents to be delivered after a specific delay. I came up with a few. Birthday letter for our daughter. A note to her sister. June was sentimental in a private way, and she had spent a good part of those last months writing things down. Cards, letters, handwritten notes that kept turning up in drawers and coat pockets for months after she was gone. I told myself it was probably something like that. It wasn't. Bruce Halliday's office was on the 4th floor of a building downtown, the kind of office with framed degrees on the wall and a window that looked out over the river. He was in his early 60s, small and careful with his words, the kind of man who had probably been a very good attorney for a long time. He shook my hand and got right to it, which I appreciated. He slid a large manila envelope across the desk. June's handwriting was on the front. My name, just Lester. She had called me that since our second date, my last name as a nickname, a joke that outlasted the joke. She brought this to me 11 months before she passed, Bruce said. She was very specific about the instructions. She said, and I wrote this down at her request. She said he'll want to do something about it right away. I need him to wait until he's steady. I picked up the envelope. It was heavier than I expected. "Did she tell you what was in it?" I asked. "In general terms," he said. "She wanted to make sure it reached you through proper channels. She was concerned that if she left it at home, it might be found before you were ready or by someone other than you." I asked him who she was worried about finding it. He looked at me for a moment and said, "I think the documents will explain that." I drove home with the envelope on the passenger seat and didn't open it until I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee. It was a Tuesday. The light through the window was the thin yellow kind that February makes in Tennessee, and the house was quiet in the way it had been quiet for 14 months, the particular silence of a house that used to have more noise in it. Inside the envelope was a USB drive, a document folder secured with a rubber band, and a letter, sealed, my name on the front in her handwriting. I opened the document folder first. June had organized it the way she organized everything, chronologically, tabbed, with a handwritten index on the first page. She had been an office manager for a medical practice for 16 years. Organizing things was not a skill for her, it was a reflex. The first section was a set of bank statements, our joint savings account, going back 22 months. I hadn't looked closely at those statements in years. June had handled our finances, not because I'd asked her to, but because she was better at it, and we had both known that, and I had been quietly grateful and entirely comfortable with not thinking about it. She had highlighted 3 transfers. Each one was described in the transaction memo as investment, relocation, advisory services. The amounts were $11,000, $8,000, and $14,000, spread over 7 months. Total, $33,000. I didn't recognize them. Below the statements, June had paper-clipped a note in her handwriting. These were not discussed with me. I did not authorize them. I checked my email records. No notification. I checked the advisory agreement. The language about discretionary transfers requires my written approval for any amount over $5,000. I did not give written approval. Our financial advisor's name was Marcus Webb. He had been managing our retirement accounts and a portion of our savings for 9 years. June's brother had recommended him. We had met him at a cookout at her brother's house, eaten his wife's potato salad, watched him play with their dog, and eventually handed him a meaningful portion of our financial future. He was 51 years old. He coached his son's baseball team. He sent Christmas cards. I set the bank statements down and went to our filing cabinet, the one in the spare room, 2 drawers, June's labels on everything, and found our copy of the advisory agreement in under a minute. I read the section on discretionary transfers. She had been right. Written approval required. Over $5,000. No exceptions listed. I went back to the envelope. The second section of the folder was a printed email thread. 11 emails over 4 months between June and Marcus. The first one was June asking in her careful, non-confrontational way about the $11,000 transfer, noting that she hadn't received notification, asking if there had been a clerical error. Marcus's reply came 2 days later. He told her it was a portfolio optimization adjustment, that the notification had likely gone to her spam folder, and that these decisions fell under the proactive management language in their agreement. He used a lot of words to say very little, which I recognized even then as a specific skill. June had replied, I reviewed the agreement again. Section 4.2 requires written client approval for discretionary transfers above $5,000. I don't have a record of providing that. Can you send me the authorization form I would have signed? Marcus did not send a form. He sent 3 more paragraphs about market timing and fiduciary responsibility. He never answered the question she had asked. The thread ended with June's last email, 4 months before she died. Marcus, I'm going to need to put this matter on hold for a while due to some health issues. I want to revisit it when I'm able. I'm noting this correspondence for my records. She had been in her 2nd round of treatment when she wrote that. She had been tired in a way that didn't lift anymore, and she had kept working, kept managing the household, kept showing up, and apparently kept documenting a financial fraud in whatever hours she had left over. I put the emails down. The 3rd section was something I wasn't expecting. It was a printout from a website I didn't recognize, a financial regulatory database with Marcus Webb's name at the top. There were 2 entries. A customer complaint filed 4 years ago, marked resolved, with no details available, and a disclosure from 6 years prior, a written supervisory notice from a previous broker-dealer, the reason listed as failure to follow client instructions regarding account activity. He had done this before. Whatever this was, he had done something like it before, and it had not been enough to stop him from doing it again. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. Then I picked up the USB drive. My daughter Laura had given me a laptop when I retired, a refurbished ThinkPad I mostly used to watch football highlights, and I plugged the drive into the side of it and waited. There were 2 folders, one labeled Documents, Copies, which duplicated most of what was in the paper folder, and one labeled "Listen to this first, MW." Inside that second folder was a single audio file, 41 minutes long. June had recorded a meeting. I recognized the ambient sound of Marcus's office, the faint hum of the HVAC, the particular quality of silence in a room with carpet and upholstered chairs. She had been in that office with me a dozen times, and when I heard that background sound, I felt it in my chest before I consciously understood why. She had been alone. It was a meeting I hadn't known about. She had recorded the whole thing without telling Marcus. And in Tennessee, state law allows a party to a conversation to record it without the other party's consent. I know this now because I looked it up that afternoon. She opened by asking him again about the authorization forms, calmly, without accusation. The way she asked for things, which was always quietly and exactly once, and then waited to see what kind of person you were. Marcus gave the same non-answers he'd given in the emails: reallocation, optimization, proactive management. She let him finish, and then she said, "Marcus, I've been through the agreement 3 times. Section 4.2 is not ambiguous. I'd like to see the signed authorization for each of the 3 transfers." There was a pause on the recording, maybe 3 seconds. Then Marcus said, "June, I want to be straightforward with you. Managing investments during a period of volatility involves judgment calls that sometimes move faster than the paperwork." She said, "So, there's no signed authorization." He didn't answer that directly. He pivoted to talking about performance, about how the accounts had grown, about how clients sometimes focus on process when they should be looking at outcomes. And then June said something that I had to rewind and listen to twice. She said, "Marcus, I also want to ask you about the account my brother set up with you." Silence. Longer this time. "What do you mean?" he said. "My brother has had an account with you for about 3 years. I don't know the details of it, but in the last 7 months, I've noticed that the timing of the transfers out of our savings correlates, within a few days, with deposits into an account that I believe is connected to him. I could be wrong. I hope I'm wrong. But I wanted to ask you directly." Marcus Webb said, "I can't discuss other clients' accounts. I'm sure you understand." And June said, "I understand. I just wanted you to know that I'd noticed." She had been 53 years old, and she had been dying. And she had sat across from this man in his carpeted office and told him, without flinching, that she had noticed. I closed the laptop. I walked out to the back porch and stood there for a while in the cold. The garden was still and brown and waiting for spring, which it would not know. June was not going to tend it. Her brother's name is Dennis. He is 58 years old. He had been her older brother and her closest sibling for her entire life. He had held her hand at the hospital. He had given a eulogy at her funeral that made people cry who had only known her briefly. He had come to the house for dinner twice a month for 26 years and eaten at the same table where I had just read his sister's evidence against him. I went back inside and opened the sealed letter. 2 pages, her handwriting. And I won't share all of it because some of it was for me and only me, the kind of words that belong to a marriage and not to anyone outside it. But the part I need to share read like this. I don't know exactly what Dennis knew or when he knew it. I know that he introduced us to Marcus. I know that the timing of what I found suggests he may have benefited from it. I know that I cannot prove this yet, and I don't want you to confront either of them before someone qualified has looked at everything I've gathered. I especially don't want you to confront Dennis alone. You have always trusted him. I trusted him too. I'm still not sure what I believe about him, and I'm sorry to leave that uncertainty for you to carry. Please take everything in this envelope to an attorney who does not know Marcus or Dennis. Please let them decide what to do with it. Please don't try to handle this yourself. I know how you are. You'll want to call Dennis and ask him. Don't. Not yet. I knew how I was too. She was right. I called a friend from church, a man named Harold, a retired federal prosecutor who had moved back to Chattanooga to be near his grandkids, and told him I needed a recommendation for a securities attorney who had no connection to anyone I was about to name. He gave me a name. An attorney in Nashville, a woman named Frances, who had spent 15 years working financial fraud cases before going into private practice. I drove to Nashville the following Thursday with June's envelope in my lap and told Frances everything start to finish. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she asked if I had opened the accounts online since June's death. I told her I had not looked closely. She asked me to look. I pulled up the account on my phone. She leaned across the desk, not to see the screen, just as a gesture of attention, and I scrolled through the last 14 months of transaction history. There had been 4 more transfers since June died. Each one described the same way. Each one between $5,000 and $12,000. The total across all 7 transfers, the 3 June had found and the 4 after, was just under $91,000. Marcus Webb had continued after she died. He had continued while I was arranging a funeral and learning to cook my own meals and trying to figure out what to do with her garden. He had looked at the account of a man who had just buried his wife, and he had taken more. Frances said, "I'm going to need you to leave everything with me and not contact Webb or your brother-in-law." Her voice was very even, the voice of someone who had heard things like this before and had learned to be useful instead of reactive. "What your wife gathered is significant. The recording is significant. I'm going to reach out to FinRay and to the Tennessee Securities Division this week." I asked her whether she thought Dennis had known what Marcus was actually doing. She paused for a moment. "I think that's the right question. I don't think I can answer it yet, but I want you to understand that there are different kinds of involvement, and some of them are easier to prove than others." She filed a complaint with FinRay within 2 weeks. The Tennessee Securities Division opened a parallel investigation. The process was not fast and it was not clean. It took 11 months from that first meeting in Nashville before anything decisive happened. During that time, I kept going to hardware stores and cooking bad dinners and making slow progress on learning to manage the finances June had managed for 26 years, and I did not call Dennis, which was one of the harder things I have done. Marcus Webb voluntarily surrendered his securities license 18 months after June made that recording. By then, investigators had identified 2 other clients, older couples, both of them people who trusted him, who had experienced similar unauthorized transfers. A federal referral was made. He was charged with wire fraud and investment advisor fraud. He pleaded guilty 14 months later and was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison plus restitution. The restitution process was where Dennis became impossible to ignore. The investigation had found what June had suspected. Dennis had opened his account with Marcus approximately 3 years before June noticed the first transfer. Over the following 2 years, Marcus had made a series of cash withdrawals from a holding account and passed them through a third party to Dennis, 14 deposits over 26 months, totaling a little over $22,000. The investigators believed Dennis had understood that Marcus was redirecting client funds. He had not known whose funds specifically. He had told himself apparently that it was some kind of fee-splitting arrangement, something grey but not criminal, the way people tell themselves stories about the things they want to be true. He was charged as a co-conspirator. He negotiated a plea in exchange for cooperation. He paid back the $22,000. I have not had a real conversation with Dennis since the investigation became public. I have seen him once, at a distance, at a family event I almost didn't attend. He looked at me across the room in a way that I think was meant to communicate something, remorse maybe, or a request for something I wasn't ready to offer. I looked back at him and then I turned away, not with anger exactly, more with a kind of tiredness that I think is its own answer for now. June had written, near the end of her letter, something I have come back to more than anything else she left me. She wrote, "The hardest thing I've had to sit with is that I'm not sure Dennis is a bad person who did a bad thing, or a weak person who let a bad thing happen. I don't think those are the same. I also don't think you can love someone for 30 years and then know exactly what to do with that love when they've hurt you. I don't have an answer for that. I just wanted you to know that I thought about it, and I didn't want you to think you were wrong for not knowing either. She had been lying in the spare bedroom by then, the one with the better light, and she had been writing this letter. I think about that, about what it takes to be in that much pain and still be thinking clearly about the people you're leaving behind, still trying to give them something useful for the road ahead. Francis recovered most of the money through the restitution order and a subsequent civil settlement with Marcus's broker-dealer firm, which had failed to supervise him adequately, and settled rather than litigate. A portion of what was recovered I have kept. A portion I donated to the oncology department at Erlanger Hospital, which is where June spent a lot of her last year. It felt like the right place for it. I still live in the Craftsman bungalow on the same half-acre lot. The front porch still has the paint color June chose, and I have not changed it, not because I'm frozen, but because I like it. This past spring, I did something I hadn't done the 2 springs before. I went out to the garden. I didn't know what most of the plants were. I took photographs and looked them up one by one and found a gardening forum online where people are patient with beginners, and I kept 3 of the beds going. It was not her garden. It was a version of it that I was making, slowly and badly, with the knowledge she would have helped me do better. She left me a lot of things. She left me the letter, the documents, the recording. She left me the practical evidence of what she was, a woman who loved carefully and thought clearly and did not flinch from hard things, even the hardest one. But the thing I carry with me most is not from the envelope. It's from the recording. The moment she said, quietly and without hesitation, "I just wanted you to know that I'd noticed." She had been sick. She had been tired in a way I can't fully imagine, and she had sat in that office and looked at a man who had been stealing from her, and she had made sure he understood that she was not a person who could be stolen from without someone noticing, without someone keeping track, without the truth eventually finding a way out of the wall and into the open. She was right about that. She was right about most things. I keep thinking about the gap between what June knew and what she said out loud. For months, she sat with evidence that would have shattered our household, the theft, her brother's involvement, the whole quiet machinery of it, and she didn't say a word to me. People who heard this story sometimes ask how she could do that, how she could carry something that heavy without putting it down. I used to wonder the same thing. I don't anymore. What I understand now is that June wasn't protecting me from the truth. She was protecting the truth itself. She knew that if she told me before she had everything documented, before the recording was made and the statements were organized and the regulatory history was printed out and filed, I would have done what I do, called Dennis, walked into Marcus's office, made it a confrontation before it was a case. And a confrontation without evidence is just noise. It gives the other person time to prepare, time to destroy things, time to build a story. June understood that. She had the clarity to see several moves ahead when she was running out of time to make any moves at all. That kind of thinking, disciplined, patient, unsentimental about what's actually happening even when you love the people involved, that's not something most of us practice. We react, we confront, we let our feelings move faster than our judgment. June didn't. She sat in that attorney's office and handed over a folder she had been building for nearly a year, and she gave instructions about timing, about sequence, about making sure the right person got the right information in the right order. She was 53 years old, and she was dying, and she was still thinking more clearly than most people think when everything is fine. What Marcus did had a logic to it. The logic of a person who had decided that the people around him existed primarily as resources. He had done it before, at a smaller scale, and the consequences had been minor enough that he'd concluded the risk was acceptable. That calculus only works as long as no one is paying attention. June paid attention. She paid attention when she was tired and scared and had every reason to let someone else handle it, And because she did, the calculus eventually stopped working. Dennis is harder. I've spent more time on Dennis than on Marcus, honestly, because Marcus is easier to categorize. Dennis told himself a story about what he was doing, that it was a gray area, alone, something that didn't fully touch him. And he let that story do the work of not knowing. That kind of self-deception isn't rare. Most harm that moves through families moves that way. Not through people who want to cause damage, but through people who want something badly enough to stop asking what it costs. The asking is the thing. The willingness to ask yourself the honest question and wait for the honest answer instead of the comfortable one. That's what Dennis didn't do. And it's what June did every single day of those last months. I think about her at that craft desk, writing careful notes by herself. Not bitter, not performing bravery. Just doing the next right thing with whatever she had left. There's a kind of integrity in that. The quiet, unglamorous kind that doesn't ask to be witnessed. That I've been trying to carry forward. Not always successfully. But I know what it looks like now. I saw it in her handwriting on the pages she left for me, and I don't think I'll ever fully stop trying to be worth what she believed I was.